The coffee splashed across my textbook in a perfect, catastrophic arc. I watched it happen in slow motion, the cup tipping, the brown liquid escaping, the horrified expression forming on her face. Chaos in a university library cafe on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Her voice was a rapid-fire combination of embarrassment and panic. "Your book, your notes." I grabbed napkins from the dispenser, dabbing at the spreading stain across my history notes. "It's fine, really. These are just rough drafts anyway." That was a lie. Those were my only notes for Professor Wilson's midterm paper, but something about her distress made me want to calm her down rather than add to it. "I'm such a disaster," she said, her hands fluttering as she tried to help. "Let me buy you another coffee at least." I looked up properly for the first time and felt a strange sense of recognition, though I knew we'd never met. Dark hair pulled into a messy bun, wide brown eyes, and a small silver nose ring that caught the fluorescent light. She wore a worn leather jacket that seemed too large for her slender frame. "I'm Claire," she said, extending a hand that was adorned with several thin silver rings. "Adam," I replied, taking her hand. It was cold from the rain outside. "And I'd love that coffee, especially if you'll join me." The words slipped out before I could think better of them. I wasn't typically so forward, but there was something about her that drew me in, a kind of kinetic energy that seemed barely contained in her small frame. She smiled, revealing a slight gap between her front teeth that somehow made her more intriguing, not less. "Well, Adam, it's the least I can do after nearly drowning your semester's work." That first coffee turned into a second one, which turned into dinner at the small Thai place near campus. Claire talked rapidly, her hands constantly in motion, about her love for classic detective novels and her dream of opening a boutique someday. I told her about my passion for medieval history, feeling both self-conscious and strangely proud as she listened with genuine interest. "You're different," she said suddenly, leaning across the table. "Most guys just talk about themselves, but you actually listen." "Maybe you're just more interesting than most people," I replied, surprised by my own boldness. After that day we met regularly at the library cafe. I'd arrive early, secure a table in the corner, and wait for the whirlwind that was Claire to arrive. Sometimes she'd be 10 minutes late, sometimes 30, always with an elaborate explanation involving lost keys or helping a stranger or a sudden thunderstorm that made her detour. One evening, as we were walking across campus, the sky clear after days of rain, I introduced Claire to Leo, my best friend since childhood. He gave me a meaningful look after she walked ahead to examine a campus bulletin board. "She's intense," he whispered. "In a good way, I think. But definitely not boring." "I know," I said, watching her. "That's what I like about her." Late-night walks became our thing. Claire believed campus had a different energy after midnight, like it's breathing easier without all the stressed-out students stomping around, she explained. We'd talk about everything and nothing, our voices echoing slightly in the empty courtyards. 2 months after the coffee spill, I met Hannah, Claire's roommate, who greeted me with an exaggerated wink. "So you're the history guy," she said, looking me up and down. "Fair warning, she's a force of nature. Hope you can keep up." I laughed, but there was something in Hannah's tone that seemed like a genuine caution. Claire pulled me away before I could think too much about it. The night I asked Claire to marry me was perfect. Clear autumn sky, the library lit up behind us, the stars unusually bright for the city. I had rehearsed a speech but forgot every word when the moment came. Instead, I simply pulled out the ring, a small sapphire I'd saved 3 months to buy, and asked, "Will you marry me?" Claire's eyes widened, and for one terrifying moment she was speechless, something I'd never witnessed before. Then she launched herself at me, nearly knocking us both over. "Yes. Of course yes," she cried, laughing and crying at once. "I was beginning to think you'd never ask." As I slipped the ring onto her finger, I felt certain I'd made the perfect choice. Claire was unpredictable, exciting, alive in a way that made everyone around her feel more alive too. I couldn't imagine wanting anything else. I should have listened more carefully to Hannah's warning. We married in Claire's mother's backyard. Nothing extravagant, just white folding chairs on green grass, fairy lights strung between trees, and Claire, radiant in a vintage dress she'd found at a thrift store and altered herself. Leo gave a toast that made everyone laugh. "I never thought Adam would find someone crazier than me," he said, raising his glass. "But Claire, you're exactly what he needs, someone to pull him out of his history books and into the real world." Hannah's toast came next, her words wrapped in humor but laced with something else. "Claire, you found a good one," she said, her eyes darting between us. "And Adam, good luck keeping up with her. She waits for no one. Those first years were the best of my life." We rented a small apartment near the university where I'd begun teaching. Claire started her online boutique, spending hours hunched over her laptop, designing her website and sourcing vintage clothes. I'd bring her tea and she'd pull me down for a kiss without looking away from the screen. The first hairline cracks appeared so subtly I barely noticed them. "He's too soft with everyone," I overheard Lorraine, Claire's mother, say to her during a Sunday dinner. "You need someone with more backbone." Claire just laughed. "That's why I love him. He balances me." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the warm weight of Claire's hand in mine under the table. We were happy. That was enough. But sometimes, late at night, I'd reach for Claire only to find her scrolling through her phone, planning trips with her friends Jessa and Tina that I wasn't invited to join. When I asked about them, she'd kiss me quickly and say, "Just girls' trips, babe. You wouldn't be interested." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. And when she'd curl against me afterward, her head on my chest, I'd tell myself this was all I needed. Us together, building a life. I didn't realize I was the only one building. Mickey came into the world on a Tuesday so hot the asphalt seemed to breathe. After 18 hours of labor, the nurse placed him in my arms, a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to know things. "Hey buddy," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'm your dad." Something fundamental shifted in me at that moment. The universe rearranged itself around this small person. Nothing would ever be the same. The first weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and diaper changes. I'd wake before Claire did when Mickey cried, padding down the hallway to his room, lifting his warm body from the crib. "You're such a superhero, Dad," Claire would say, watching me from the doorway as I rocked Mickey back to sleep. But she rarely got up herself, claiming she needed her rest for the boutique meetings the next day. I recorded everything on my phone. Mickey's first smile, the way his tiny fingers gripped my thumb, his eyes tracking shadows across the ceiling. Claire would watch the videos later, cooing over them but always with her attention split between our son and her phone. "Babe, can you take him today? Jessa and Tina want to meet for brunch," became a common refrain. Lorraine would appear at our door, offering to give me a break, but it was always Claire who left, returning hours later with shopping bags. "Mickey deserves the best," she'd say, pulling out tiny designer clothes we couldn't afford. When I mentioned our credit card bills, she'd roll her eyes. "We only live once, Adam." But then there were those perfect days, the three of us at the park, Claire pushing Mickey on the swing, her laugh mingling with his delighted squeals. I'd watch them together, my heart so full it hurt, and think, this is enough. This makes everything worth it. If only those days hadn't been so rare. By Mickey's 4th birthday, our lives had settled into a pattern. I arranged my teaching schedule around his preschool hours. We had our rituals, pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Saturdays, bedtime stories where Mickey would correct me if I skipped a single word, weekend trips to the lake where he'd throw pebbles into the water and clap at the ripples. Meanwhile, Claire's absences grew longer and more frequent. Her boutique had gained a modest following, but her income rarely covered her expenses. Still, she planned elaborate getaways with Jessa and Tina, spa weekends, wine country tours, shopping trips to New York. "You don't mind watching Mickey, right? You're so good with him," she'd say, already packing her bag. The credit card statements arrived monthly like small bombs. I'd open them after Mickey was asleep, staring at the numbers, calculating how many classes I'd need to teach to cover them. "God, Adam, you're such a softie," Claire laughed at a dinner with her mother. He apologized to the waiter for sending back undercooked chicken. Lorraine nodded knowingly. Claire could have aimed higher, you know. That investment banker was interested in sophomore year. They exchanged glances as if I wasn't sitting right there. As if I was a disappointment they jointly decided to tolerate. That night I tried to talk to Claire. "I feel like we're drifting apart," I said as she scrolled through her phone in bed. She looked up briefly. "You're being dramatic. This is just what marriage is like after a few years." The next day she returned from shopping with bags of new clothes for herself. She ruffled Mickey's hair as she passed but didn't stop to see the drawing he tried to show her. "Daddy's the fun one anyway," she said, disappearing into our bedroom. I held Mickey closer, inhaling the scent of his shampoo, realizing I was staying not for Claire but for him. Only for him. It was an ordinary Thursday. Rain tapped against the windows like hesitant fingers. Mickey was on the living room floor, making engine noises as he pushed his favorite red truck across the carpet. I just brought him apple slices, arranged in a smile that made him giggle. In the kitchen, Claire planned brunch with Jessa and Tina, her voice rising and falling in excitement about some exclusive restaurant they'd discovered. I was grading papers when I heard the thud. Looking up, I saw Mickey on the floor, his small body jerking violently, eyes rolled back. The truck lay forgotten beside him. "Claire!" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside him. "Call an ambulance." The drive to the hospital exists in fragments in my memory. Mickey's limp body in my arms as I ran to the car. Claire in the passenger seat, repeatedly dialing her mother instead of holding Mickey's hand. The rain blurring the windshield. Running red lights. Praying to gods I didn't believe in. Hours passed in the waiting room. Claire sat apart from me, texting nonstop. I paced until my legs ached, then collapsed into a chair, my whole body trembling. When the doctor finally approached, his face told me everything before he spoke. "I'm very sorry," he said, his voice gentle. "We did everything we could." The world stopped. Sound receded. I heard myself making a noise I'd never made before, something between a moan and a scream. Claire stood apart, dry-eyed, already on the phone with Lorraine. "Mom? Can you come get me?" No mention of Mickey, of our son who was gone. I drove home alone. Claire went with Lorraine, saying she needed space to process. Mickey's truck still lay on the living room floor. His half-eaten apple slices had turned brown. That night, Claire returned only to pack a bag. "I'll stay at Mom's for a while," she said, not meeting my eyes. "To think things through." She left me alone with my grief and Mickey's truck clutched in my hand, the only piece of him I had left. The morning of Mickey's funeral arrived with cruel sunshine. I stood in front of the mirror, fumbling with my tie, my fingers numb and clumsy. Claire hadn't been home in 3 days, only texting that she would meet me at the cemetery. I'd chosen a small white casket. Selected the blue suit Mickey had worn to my colleague's wedding. Placed his toy truck beside him because he couldn't sleep without it. Each decision was a knife to my heart. As I was leaving, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Claire. Thinking she was checking the time, I played it on speaker. "Adam, slight change of plans." Her voice was light, almost cheerful. "Jessa scored some last-minute tickets to New Zealand. We're at the airport now. Just bury your son and cry on your own, lol." Female laughter echoed in the background, Claire, Jessa, and Tina, before the message cut off. I stood frozen in my hallway, the phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The grief that had hollowed me out for days crystallized into something hard and sharp. Something like hate. At the cemetery, Leo waited, his face grave. Wordlessly, I handed him my phone and watched his expression shift from confusion to horror as he listened. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Adam, I'm so sorry." The ceremony was small, just Leo, a few neighbors, and Mickey's preschool teacher who wept openly. No Claire. No Lorraine. Just a tiny casket being lowered into the ground while I stood paralyzed, unable to believe this was my life. Afterward, I didn't go home immediately. I drove aimlessly, ending up at the park where Mickey loved to play. Sitting on his favorite swing, I finally allowed the rage to burn through my numbness. Claire had abandoned our son twice, first in death, then in memory. When I finally returned home, I went straight to my desk and opened my laptop. Our shared financial accounts glowed on the screen. If Claire thought she could destroy me without consequences, she was about to learn otherwise. The betrayal had awakened something in me. Something cold. Something calculated. The morning after Mickey's funeral, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt since his death. While Claire frolicked in New Zealand, I made myself coffee and sat down at my computer, a list beside me. First, I called our bank. "I need to freeze our joint accounts due to suspected fraud," I explained, my voice steady. The representative was sympathetic. Perhaps she heard something in my tone. Within minutes, our accounts were locked and I'd opened a new one solely in my name, transferring every penny we had. Next, I halted the automatic mortgage payments. Then I called the finance company for Claire's luxury SUV she'd insisted on buying last year. "I'll no longer be making payments on this vehicle," I informed them. "You should contact the primary driver about repossession." My phone buzzed constantly, Claire's name flashing on the screen. I silenced it. Leo came by that evening with takeout and beer. I showed him what I'd done. "She deserves worse," he said, raising his bottle in a grim toast. I wasn't finished. I systematically dismantled the financial web that supported Claire and her friends. I canceled the contribution to Jessa's rent that Claire had insisted we pay, just until she gets on her feet, 2 years ago. I terminated the lease on Tina's car that was somehow in our names. I froze the business account for Claire's boutique, which I had foolishly co-signed. When Lorraine left a furious message on my work phone, I blocked her number too. Last, I called the utility companies for the city apartment Claire used as her creative space, and canceled everything: electricity, water, internet. That night, I stood in Mickey's room, surrounded by his things. His clothes still smelled like him. His drawings still covered the refrigerator. His absence was a physical weight. But for the first time since his death, I felt something besides grief. I felt powerful. I felt purposeful. Claire had taken everything that mattered. Now I would take everything else. A week after my financial offensive, Leo called early in the morning. "Check your email," he said without preamble. Then check the local parents' blog. I opened my laptop to find dozens of notifications. The subject line that appeared repeatedly, "Claire Evans, grieving mother or heartless fraud?" Someone had posted Claire's voicemail online. The audio file of her laughing about missing Mickey's funeral while jetting off to New Zealand had gone viral overnight. "Did you do this?" I asked Leo when I called him back. Pause. "People deserve to know the truth," he finally said. "My cousin runs that parenting blog. I didn't think it would spread so fast. But spread it did." By afternoon, screenshots from Claire's social media, showing her hiking in New Zealand while her son was being buried, circulated alongside the audio. The hashtag #JustBuryYourSon was trending locally. Brands that had partnered with Claire's boutique publicly cut ties. Her online store page crashed from people flooding it with comments. Customers demanded refunds. Jessa and Tina made desperate attempts at damage control, claiming they didn't know about the funeral date, a lie quickly disproven by their presence on the voicemail, laughing in the background. Lorraine called, screaming that I had destroyed her daughter's life. I let her rage flow into my voicemail, feeling nothing. The local news picked up the story. They called me the grieving father left behind. People I'd never met left flowers at Mickey's grave. Through mutual connections, I learned that Claire had been abandoned in New Zealand. Photos surfaced of her alone at the airport, looking exhausted and hounded by travelers who recognized her from the news. She attempted an apology on social media, but it was immediately swamped with vitriol. I watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling strangely hollow. The public outrage couldn't bring Mickey back. The scandal couldn't heal what was broken in me. But watching Claire's carefully constructed world crumble felt like a form of justice Mickey would never otherwise receive. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every corner held memories of Mickey. His height marks on the doorframe, fingerprints on the windows, the dent in the wall from when he'd crashed his tricycle indoors despite my warnings. I sold almost everything, keeping only Mickey's drawings, his favorite books, and that red truck. The rest I let go, along with the mortgage and the memories. With the money, I bought a small cabin by the lake where Mickey and I had spent his 3rd birthday. He'd been fascinated by the ducks, trying to chase them into the water until I'd scooped him up, both of us laughing. The cabin needed work. Peeling paint, creaky floorboards, a roof that leaked when it rained hard. Fixing it gave my hands purpose while my heart slowly, painfully learned to beat without Mickey. I arranged his drawings on the wall beside the fireplace and placed his truck on the mantel. Each night, I'd tell him about my day as the sun set over the water, speaking to the empty room as if he could hear me. "The roof's fixed now, buddy. No more bucket brigade when it rains." One morning I found freshly baked bread on my porch, still warm. A note introduced my neighbor, Sophie, who lived in the blue cabin half a mile down the shore. I began walking the perimeter of the lake each day. The path was 4 miles around, and I timed myself, watching as my body grew stronger even as the pain remained constant. It wasn't healing exactly, more like learning to carry the weight of my grief without buckling. Leo visited occasionally, bringing groceries and news from town. The first time I mentioned Mickey to him without breaking down felt like a victory. "You're doing better?" he said, his relief palpable. I wouldn't call it better. Different, perhaps. The sharp edges of loss had worn into something I could hold without bleeding. One dawn, Sophie invited me fishing. We sat in companionable silence as mist rose from the water. "Not fixed," I told her when she asked how I was. "Not finished. But moving." Spring melted into summer. My days had found rhythm. Morning walks around the lake, afternoons fixing whatever needed repair on the cabin, evenings fishing with Sophie. The pain remained, but it had become a companion rather than an enemy. One morning my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't blocked. "Claire. Just talk to me. That's all." I stared at the words, surprised to feel nothing. No anger, no hatred, not even resentment. Just emptiness where those emotions had once burned so fiercely. I walked to the small tree I'd planted for Mickey near the water's edge. A memorial plaque rested at its base. "In loving memory of Mickey. You were my sunrise." The tree had taken root, new leaves unfurling in the summer warmth. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I drafted a response I knew I wouldn't send. "Your laughter buried any love I had for you. I mourned our son alone while you made his death a joke. You chose mockery, I choose peace. I deleted it, watching a heron land gracefully on the opposite shore. That evening, Sophie brought homemade stew to my porch. We sat watching fireflies emerge as darkness fell. I told her about Claire's message. You don't owe her anything, Sophie said, her voice gentle but firm. Not even a response. The next morning, I blocked Claire's number without hesitation, a gesture that would have felt momentous months ago but now seemed simple, like closing a door to a room I no longer needed to enter. Later, I stood at the lake's edge as the sun began its descent. The water reflected gold and crimson, the sky a canvas of impossible colors. Mickey's tree stood behind me, small but growing stronger. She was the past. This was now. And I was finally done looking back. I turned toward the cabin, where Sophie waited on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee, and took the first step into whatever came next.